The witch trials of Salem. The year was 1692, a time when whispers of witchcraft haunted the air of Salem. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the small, fearful town. The wind howled through the trees like the mournful cries of the innocent, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own. I remember that night vividly. My mother, a kind and gentle woman, had been accused of witchcraft. The townspeople had gathered, their faces twisted with fear and anger. They accused her of casting spells, of consorting with the devil. Their words were sharp, their eyes filled with malice. She stood before them, her hands bound, her eyes pleading for mercy that would never come. "I am innocent," she cried. But her words fell on deaf ears. The fear of the unknown, the terror of the supernatural, had blinded them all. As I watched her, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She was my everything, and I was powerless to save her. The men dragged her away, their grip tight and unyielding. They took her to the edge of the town, to a place where the trees were tall and the air was thick with foreboding. The gallows stood there, a grim reminder of the fate that awaited those who were accused. They placed the noose around her neck, and with a final look of sorrow and love, she was gone. The crowd cheered, their thirst for vengeance momentarily quenched. But for me, the nightmare had only just begun. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The pain of my mother's death gnawed at my soul, and the desire for vengeance burned within me. I began to search for a way to bring justice to those who had wronged us. In the darkest corners of Salem, I found whispers of a legend, a tale of a powerful witch who had been executed many years before. It was said that her spirit lingered, waiting for someone to call upon her. Desperate and consumed by grief, I sought out the forbidden knowledge, delving into ancient texts and forbidden rituals. I knew the risks, but my heart was set on revenge. One cold, moonlit night, I stood at the place where my mother had been taken from me. I had prepared the ritual, gathered the ingredients, and now, with trembling hands, I began to chant the incantation. The air grew thick, and a chill ran down my spine. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble, and the shadows grew darker, more sinister. Suddenly, a figure materialized before me. She was pale, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Her voice was a whisper, but it echoed through the night. "You have called me," she said, her gaze piercing through me. "What is it that you seek?" "I seek vengeance," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. "Those who took my mother must pay." A wicked smile spread across her face. "So be it," she whispered. "But know this. Once the cycle of vengeance begins, it cannot be stopped." With that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. The air was still, and for a moment, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. But the seeds of vengeance had been sown, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the town awoke to a gruesome discovery. The body of one of the accusers was found, his face twisted in terror, his skin cold and lifeless. Whispers spread like wildfire, and the fear that had once been directed at the innocent now turned inward. As the days passed, more bodies were found, each one bearing the same mark of terror. The townspeople were gripped with fear, and the once bustling streets grew silent. They had unleashed something far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. And I, standing in the shadows, watched as the spirit of the witch I had summoned exacted her vengeance. But as the bloodshed continued, I began to realize that the true horror had only just begun. For the spirit was not content with mere vengeance. She sought to continue the cycle of terror, to claim the lives of the descendants of those who had wronged her. The air grew colder, the nights darker, and the sense of dread that hung over Salem became almost palpable. And as the witch's spirit moved through the town, her presence unseen but felt, I knew that the true nightmare was yet to unfold. The days following the initial murders were filled with unease. The townspeople whispered among themselves, casting wary glances over their shoulders. The fear that had once driven them to accuse innocent women of witchcraft now consumed them. I watched as they huddled together, seeking comfort in numbers. But no amount of company could shield them from the wrath of the witch's spirit. Her vengeance was methodical, each death a chilling reminder of the past sins that had stained Salem's history. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows grew long, I found myself standing before the house of Reverend Parris. It was his daughter, Abigail, whose lies had sparked the hysteria that led to my mother's death. The house was dark, its windows like empty eyes staring into the night. I had come to warn him, to plead for an end to the violence. But as I approached, the air grew thick and cold. A sense of dread settled over me, and I knew that the witch's spirit was already there. Inside, the Reverend knelt in prayer, his voice trembling as he sought divine intervention. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the house creaked with every gust of wind. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the room, and the candle went out, plunging the room into darkness. "Who's there?" Reverend Parris called out, his voice tinged with fear. He stood, clutching his Bible to his chest, his eyes darting around the room. From the shadows emerged a figure, her form translucent and her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You have brought this upon yourselves," she hissed, her voice echoing through the room. "For your sins, you shall pay." The Reverend stumbled backward, his face pale. "No, please," he begged. "Forgive us, we were misguided," but the witch's spirit was unmoved. She raised a hand, and with a flick of her wrist, the Reverend was thrown against the wall. He cried out in pain, the sound mingling with the howl of the wind outside. The room seemed to close in around him, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I watched, frozen in place, as the spirit moved closer. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of recognition. "You," she whispered. "You called me." I nodded, my throat dry. "Yes, I did. But I didn't mean for this horror. I wanted justice, not more death." Her expression softened slightly, but her resolve did not waver. "Justice and vengeance are intertwined," she said. "But now, the cycle must be completed." With that, she turned her attention back to the Reverend. He was muttering prayers under his breath, his eyes wide with terror. The witch's spirit reached out, and as her hand touched his forehead, he screamed. The sound was inhuman, a wail of pure agony that pierced the night. And then, silence. The Reverend's body slumped to the floor, lifeless. The room was still, the air heavy with the scent of fear and death. The spirit turned to me once more. "The cycle continues," she said. "You cannot stop it." I fled the house, the echoes of the Reverend's screams ringing in my ears. The night was cold, the sky clear, and the stars seemed to mock my despair. As I ran, I could hear the whispers of the townspeople, the fear in their voices growing with each passing day. The following morning, the news of the Reverend's death spread through Salem like wildfire. The townspeople were in a state of panic, their fear turning into hysteria. They began to turn on each other, each suspecting the other of being in league with the witch's spirit. In the midst of the chaos, I found myself at the edge of the town, at the place where my mother had been executed. The gallows stood as a grim reminder of the past, and I could feel the weight of my actions pressing down on me. The spirit had been right. The cycle of vengeance could not be stopped. But I could not stand by and watch as more innocent lives were taken. I had to find a way to end the horror, to break the cycle. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the town, I made a vow. I would confront the witch's spirit, seek her out, and put an end to the terror that had gripped Salem. I knew the risk, knew that I might not survive. But I had to try. With determination in my heart and fear in my soul, I set off into the night, the path ahead shrouded in darkness and uncertainty. The witch's spirit awaited, and the true horror of Salem's past was yet to be revealed. The chill of the night air bit into my skin as I ventured deeper into the woods, the moon casting an eerie glow through the twisted branches overhead. Each step I took felt like a descent into madness, the shadows growing darker, the silence more oppressive. I clutched the ancient text that had guided me this far, its pages filled with forbidden knowledge and dark rituals. I knew where I had to go. The old abandoned church on the outskirts of Salem, a place long forgotten by the townsfolk, was said to be the source of the witch's power. It was there that she had been executed, and it was there that I hoped to find a way to end her reign of terror. As I approached the crumbling structure, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The church loomed before me, its once grand facade now a decaying relic of the past. The door creaked open with a mournful wail, and I stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. The pews were overturned, the altar shattered. It was a place of desolation, a testament to the horrors that had occurred within its walls. I made my way to the center of the room, where a faded pentagram was etched into the stone floor. I knelt before it, my hands trembling as I began to chant the incantation. The words felt heavy on my tongue, each syllable echoing through the empty church. The air grew colder, and a gust of wind blew through the open door, extinguishing my candle and plunging the room into darkness. Suddenly, a presence filled the space. The witch's spirit materialized before me, her form shimmering in the dim light. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "You have come to end this," she said, her voice a low hiss. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, too many have suffered. This must stop." She laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think you can stop me? The cycle of vengeance cannot be broken. You set this in motion, and now you must face the consequences." Before I could react, the ground beneath me began to shake. The walls of the church trembled, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. From the shadows emerged the spirits of those who had been wronged, their faces twisted in agony. They surrounded me, their voices a cacophony of pain and anger. "Help us," they wailed. "Free us from this torment." I clutched the text tighter, my mind racing. There had to be a way to end this, to bring peace to these tortured souls. As I scanned the pages, I found a passage that spoke of a final ritual, a way to banish the witch's spirit once and for all. But it required a sacrifice, a life given freely to break the cycle. My heart sank as I realized what I had to do. I stood, my resolve firm. "I will end this," I said, my voice steady. "I will give my life to free you all." The witch's spirit narrowed her eyes, a look of disbelief crossing her face. "You would sacrifice yourself? For them?" I nodded, stepping into the center of the pentagram. "Yes, It's the only way." With a wave of her hand, the witch summoned a dagger, its blade gleaming in the dim light. She handed it to me, her expression unreadable. "Very well. If you are willing, then let it be done." I took the dagger, my hand steady. As I prepared to plunge it into my heart, a scream echoed through the church. I turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, her face pale with fear. It was Abigail, the girl whose lies had started it all. "No," she cried, rushing towards me. "There has to be another way," but it was too late. The ritual had begun, and there was no turning back. I plunged the dagger into my chest, the pain searing through me. As my vision blurred, I saw the witch's spirit begin to fade, her power diminishing. The spirits around me let out a collective sigh of relief, their forms shimmering before disappearing into the ether. The last thing I saw was Abigail's tear-streaked face as she knelt beside me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." With my last breath, I smiled. The cycle was broken, and the horrors of Salem would finally come to an end. Darkness claimed me, and the world faded away. Darkness enveloped me as the pain faded, and I drifted into the void. I expected the end, the release from this mortal coil, but instead, I found myself in a realm of shadows, neither alive nor dead. The witch's spirit was there, her form more transparent than ever. "You thought you could end this with your sacrifice," she said, her voice echoing around me. "But the cycle of vengeance is not so easily broken." I struggled to comprehend my surroundings. "What do you mean? I gave my life to stop this." She smiled, a chilling expression that sent shivers through my soul. "Your sacrifice has only delayed the inevitable. The cycle is woven into the very fabric of this town. The horror will continue, and those who wronged us will suffer." With that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. My thoughts raced, desperation clawing at my mind. There had to be another way, a final act that could bring true peace. I awoke with a start, gasping for breath. The church was empty, the pentagram still etched into the floor. Abigail was gone, and the only sound was the wind howling through the broken windows. I struggled to my feet, clutching my chest where the dagger had pierced me. There was no wound, no blood, only a lingering pain. Stumbling out of the church, I found the town eerily silent. The streets were empty, and the houses seemed abandoned. As I made my way through Salem, I saw signs of the witch's vengeance everywhere, shattered windows, bloodstains, and the unmistakable marks of fear. I knew what I had to do. The final act of the ritual required me to confront the source of the cycle, the place where it had all begun. The old burial ground, where the witch had been executed centuries ago, was my destination. The path was overgrown, the air thick with the scent of decay. As I approached the burial ground, I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. The graves were ancient, their markers worn and faded. In the center stood a single, ominous stone, marking the witch's final resting place. I knelt before the grave, my heart pounding in my chest. "I am here to end this," I whispered. "To break the cycle once and for all." The ground trembled, and the air grew cold. The witch's spirit appeared before me, her form flickering like a dying flame. "You dare to challenge me again?" she hissed. I stood my ground, determination burning in my eyes. "This ends now. No more vengeance, no more death." With a wave of her hand, the witch summoned the spirits of those who had been wronged. They surrounded me, their faces twisted with pain and anger. "They demand justice," she said. "Can you deny them that?" I took a deep breath, my resolve unshaken. No, I cannot. But justice is not vengeance. It's time to let go of the past and find peace. The witch's eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of humanity within them. Peace? She whispered. After all this time? I nodded. Yes, you and those who suffered deserve to rest. The cycle of vengeance only perpetuates the pain. Let it end here, with me. With a final, desperate scream, the witch's spirit dissolved into the air, her power fading. The spirits around me began to dissipate, their forms shimmering as they found release from their torment. The air grew still, the oppressive weight lifting from my shoulders. I collapsed to the ground, exhaustion washing over me. The burial ground was silent, the sense of dread replaced by a profound calm. The cycle had been broken, and Salem could finally heal. Weeks later, the town began to rebuild. The fear that had once gripped Salem was replaced by a sense of hope. Abigail, who had witnessed the horrors firsthand, became a beacon of change, advocating for understanding and forgiveness. As for me, I remained a guardian of the past, ensuring that the horrors of the witch trials were never forgotten. The memory of my mother and the sacrifices made lingered in my heart, a reminder of the darkness that once consumed us all. The cycle of vengeance had been broken, and Salem could finally move forward, free from the shadows of its past. The end.